Fresh Economic Thinking podcast, new ideas and analysis with Dr. Cameron Murray and Jonathan Gadir. G'day Cameron, how are you going?
Good, thanks, Jonathan. How have you been? It's been a while.
Yeah, I've been overseas. I went to Israel to see the relatives, and I stopped in a few places like Singapore and Dubai, all of which are very expensive. And now I'm back. And I have to say that it's quite funny seeing a lot of the rage against airlines. I mean, it is justified. They treat people like shit, but I always think that when an industry treats consumers like shit and as though consumer protection rules don't apply to them, like losing bags and not communicating and just like treating people like crap, it's usually because they actually don't have to abide by them because the industry they're in is kind of a monopoly or almost a monopoly.
Yeah.
And I just think when I see people say, "Oh, that's it, I'm done with Qantas," which I also feel totally, I just wonder, well, really, next time you want to fly somewhere and you really think you're going to have that many other options? Maybe Singapore Airlines, but they're going to charge a heap more and you're probably not going to be willing to pay it,
Yeah, that's right. No, that's totally right. I think it will improve over time, but yeah, it's been terrible everywhere lately for air travel. I often think this is one of those examples where we decided we could switch the economy off and on again and it would all be fine. And maybe that's not really the case. We talk about supply chains. Well, I think the airline is the lived experience of a supply chain disruption due to shutdown. But good
It's
point.
exactly the same even in Israel, like news stories about, big room in the airport where the bags are just chucked because there's not enough staff to do it properly. The baggage handling is just not able to get back up to ramp up to the scale it needs to because people have gone on to do other things in their life and they just can't hire people.
That's right. Anyone who was a baggage handler 2 years ago is probably not a baggage handler today. So they've had to rebuild from scratch. That's right. Yeah. Well, it's nice to have you back.
Thank you. Yes, good to be back. And let's talk about a barney that actually someone at work contacted me about, which is like about the incentives that may or may not apply to economists when they take funding or money or fees to do studies. Tell me a bit about this particular one that got my work colleague interested. I believe it has to do with Uber.
Yeah, that's right. So about a week ago, there were the Uber files, which were a leaked cache of documents from Uber that got released. And it was found that Uber paid $100,000 to Alan Kruger, an economist, to write a paper that was very favorable of their business model using their corporate data. And in the years until now, since that paper was written, no one really knew about that $100,000 payment. And it's all come out in the press now. And what's really interesting in the Barney is that Justin Wolfers, who's an Australian economist living in the US, very high profile, has come out on Twitter defending him, saying, I knew Alan well enough to know a bit about the market price for his time. It's extremely unlikely he would have agreed to write a paper for $100,000. And of course, journalist Felix Salmon replies, but he did write a paper for $100,000. And this is a bit of the mindset of how captured economists are, who, and it's very funny, incentives apply to everyone else except economists. Justin Wolfers wrote on Twitter in response to Felix Salmon, the journalist, pointing this out. He said, I think you're missing the point. It's likely he found the Uber data irresistibly interesting. I would have. That Uber wanted to send him a check was likely beside the point.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay.
really, you might be pretty well off guy, but someone sending you $100,000 to get on your spreadsheet and do a little data manipulation, write a short report, there's an incentive there. What was really interesting and turned this from just, a hilarious sort of insight that we've known about since what's that great film that came out after the financial crisis?
The Big Short.
About no, the one about insiders trading, and they interviewed all the these academics at these high profile universities and saying, well, is it okay that this academic is earning all this money on the side from doing all this consulting work for these vested interests? And the heads of these schools at Harvard and Princeton and all that just, stare blankly and make themselves look like fools. It's called Inside Job, the film. I think it was from
Inside
2010
Job.
or 2011.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a rehash of the same thing we know is going on, but it's very high profile and about Uber. But what makes it a Barney is I realized that Justin Wolfer's mates, academic mates in Australia, have started a little firm called E61, which is, like any other economics consulting firm. And Justin Wolfers is a senior academic fellow for them. So he helps them out with advice. He's not on the payroll. But they too have used Uber data to write a paper that's called Gig Economy Labor Market. So essentially, his mate's economic consulting firm in Australia has done exactly the same thing as Alan Kruger. So I pointed that out on Twitter, and Justin got back to me and he said, you ought to know that this E61's not a consulting firm, but a not-for-profit economic research institute. And as a senior academic fellow, I provide advice in exchange for $0. Which, of course, I didn't say he got paid. I just thought it was an interesting coincidence that his mate's firm also got their hands on Uber data and wrote a report, which I assume they didn't write for free. And he's out there defending Alan Kruger for taking $100,000 for a very important, high-profile report that justified a lot of Uber's business practices.
So what's your position on stuff like this? Okay, let's forget about the fact that he, probably was incentivized to, write a report that's favorable to Uber. Like, generally, do you think that economists are blind to the bias that is created when they take money from, a client?
No, not at all. Economists are as groupy and as human as the rest of us. They like to be socially accepted and they like money. So I think they're exactly the same. I guess, I do consulting work as well, and I get paid from various organizations. And I think the important thing is to differentiate what's, an academic paper and what's a sort of paid consulting report, a glossy report. And in cases like this, where it's like, oh no, we're just doing research here out in the wilderness as academics, and here's an interesting finding. I think readers and policy people get a different view or perception that, a university did that. Whereas if you do work for a company and publish it under the company's brand and go, I got paid to write this for the company, then people take it with a grain of salt and understand that it's, part of the corporate debate that they're having. So I think that's an important distinction. So it doesn't seem to happen much in the US, but in many ways, this is the role of economists, right? Manipulating the public debate for their tribe, however that might be.
All right. So now on to our topic for today. You want to talk about an update to your book.
Yeah, that's right. So on the 2nd of August, 2022, the second edition of Game of Mates that was originally released in 2017 is coming out, and it's now got a new title. It's called Rigged: How Networks of Powerful Mates Rip Off Everyday Australians. It's predominantly the same book. It's updated figures, updated examples in different chapters, an extra chapter on the COVID period, and it's now published by Allen and Unwin. So I'm hoping it reaches a broader audience now, and the message in there can be more widely digested in the policy discourse, because the problem of political favoritism the revolving door, and everyday Aussies getting ripped off has certainly not gone away.
Okay. So let's dig in a bit to something that is, or updated, or something that's new in this edition. You mentioned a section on the COVID period,
Yeah, that's right.
and maybe you can start with that one, and then we can go from there.
What's been super interesting lately is, um, and we mention it in the book, which was, the text was finished more than 6 months ago.
Yep.
But what's been interesting in the last few weeks is that all these quarantine facilities that we decided were really important and that we had to quickly build, they were the top priority for us. We spent 400 million on one of them in Brisbane. It's not quite finished yet. And before it's even done, we've decided we've got no use for it. We spent 220 million on the Wellcamp one in Toowoomba. That was part of a secret contract with the Wagner family to do that. We've also decided we have no use for that anymore. Between Sydney and Melbourne and elsewhere, it seems like the country spent $1 billion building quarantine facilities that nobody wants anymore. And they do not know what to do with them. And we made the point that this could have been known in advance and we didn't have to do it. And as time rolls on, we're seeing that sort of prediction is more right than it's ever been. So that's just one example. But another one is Australia buying 250 million doses of various COVID vaccines. 250 million doses. I don't even think we know yet what we have spent collectively on these things, but everyone's vaccinated to their eyeballs now. No one wants any more vaccinations. And it looks like something like 90% of what we'd bought is going to go to waste. Either we'll pay the contract and not get them delivered, or they're delivered and they're going to end up in the bin because we can't preserve them and keep them from going bad. The Pfizer one needs refrigeration, etc.
Yeah.
So we're talking here, even at a few dollars a dose, another few $1 billion um, in vaccines. That's excluding the cost of rolling them out and all the rest. And here we are today. We've got the peak COVID outbreak in mid 2022. So their effectiveness was not very good. So the quarantine, we went through that, wasted billions. The vaccines, we went through that, wasted billions. And all the way, plenty of insiders were supported. We note in the book things like Orders of Australia being used to reward people for their loyalty to the government of the day, to their insider mates. And we can see that, I believe, in Queensland, Jeanette Young was the chief health officer during the initial panic. Where is she now? Queensland Governor General.
Okay.
So you get this new title and new pay packet for playing your role during this period, supporting your mates and those networks. And then later they reward you with this cushy job and this high profile appointment. And in terms of the revolving door, I think it's more relevant than ever. We've seen the John Barilaro controversy of creating a $500,000 a year trade commissioner for New South Wales job that he then appointed himself to before he quit politics.
Yep.
And it just goes on and on. So yeah, that's sort of a few recent things that have happened.
The vaccine thing is just extraordinary, and it's not the first time. Tamiflu. Do you remember Tamiflu? Like there was supposed to be this very, this wonder drug for, I think it was swine flu or bird flu or one of those, and we bought like a massive stockpile, and then it turns out a few months later, it's no better than a placebo, and it has absolutely no, there's no evidence that it actually does anything. But before we realized that, we'd already bought, I don't know, however much it was, some ridiculous amount of the stuff.
Look, there's the incentives in pharmaceuticals. We note it in the rigged this new edition. We only have a few updates in that section, but this is a long-term play by pharmaceutical companies to get new drugs that may or may not work very well onto public subsidized drug lists. That is really where the big game is. And that's why so many doctors get flown to conferences by pharmaceutical companies, given gifts and all those sorts of things. So this is an ongoing thing. And I think what we've realized well, I've realized, you've realized, but a lot of people haven't realized that COVID was an amazing opportunity to ramp this up.
Yep.
Right? A lot of people still, and this puzzles me in general, who were critical of the pharmaceutical industry just 3 years ago,
Yep.
suddenly forgot that, and they're like, no, 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 they wouldn't sell us 1 billion doses or 250 million doses of a drug that doesn't really work and is really high risk because this is a pandemic. This is important.
Yeah.
They might do that on your average disease, which is unimportant, but on this one they wouldn't. And I
Yeah.
think that was completely naive, and we point that out, obviously. I mean,
Yeah.
all the biggest scams in pharmaceuticals were for very important diseases with drugs that didn't work and had terrible side effects.
Yeah.
And there's been so many fines. So that's just one interesting case.
Yeah. It's such a great example of the lack of nuance that we have now, that if you're in, the progressive / left-wing tribe, you can't believe anymore anything bad about pharmaceutical companies pushing these vaccines, because that would be saying something that those kind of people say, and we can't have that. So
that's right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre how the tribal lines have been drawn. But there's some really interesting examples that are still in the news. For example, the new Labour treasurer, Jim Chalmers is his name, I believe, has announced a review into superannuation. And it was only just a year or two ago that the previous LNP government tightened up a lot of rules on super and gave them more obligations to disclose to members. There's this sort of rank and yank process of underperforming funds being penalized. And it looks like Labor, funnily enough, is ready to unwind some of those rules. And so I find this very, it's one of my bugbears. And there's a chapter in Rigged on superannuation, that the Labor Party is so tied to the privatization of retirement and this big financial game that when there's a choice to side with the members of super funds or the managers of super funds in terms of these super regulations that the LNP introduced, they're willing to side with the super managers and the various union officials that stock the boards and the management teams of these funds, rather than the actual members and the workers who put their hard-earned savings into these funds and pay the fees over their whole lifetime. So I think that's just another recent example of how entrenched the game still is, how willing and able the networks of powerful mates are still to rip off everyday Australians and lie about it, essentially. Tell each other, oh yeah, when we're removing the obligation for your super fund to look out for your financial interest, but we're doing it for you. How is that possible? How is that possible? So that's just another case. So the networks are still going, the political insiders are still playing, and we're still being ripped off. And so I think it's timely that, we get this new edition of the book out there and shake the tree a little and see how people respond.
Have you got anything in the book on why it costs so much to build transport infrastructure?
Well, yeah, funny you say that. Pretty much every place complains about why it's so expensive to build trains and roads in our city. Australia complains and compares ourselves to America. Americans complain, compare themselves to somewhere else. New Zealand complains and go, we're the most expensive place to build a road or a tunnel. Everyone complains.
Yeah.
This is so my point being, it's very hard to distinguish the truth from the political games that accompany any major project like this. Like, at the end of the day, you stop complaining when you've done something a few times and get good at it and you've got the right machines. So in Brisbane, for example, the first tunnel under the Brisbane River, very controversial. Everyone complained, why is it so expensive? But now that we've got a bunch of tunneling machines and a few companies that really have a lot of expertise, no one really complains about the cost of tunneling anymore. We're kind of used to it. So I think it's more a political thing than anything else. And also we do, this is probably the more interesting contribution of this book in terms of investing in public infrastructure is not talking about what it costs to construct new roads, but the choices we make of which roads and which tunnels to build. Because you can build a road that has a huge economic benefit if it connects the right part of the network, or a rail extension. Or you can do one that produces a huge profit, for example, for the toll road owner, but does so because it reduces the throughput of the rest of the network and forces people onto your toll road. And that's what we explicitly model in the book. In the appendix, we use this big database of Australian transport projects and the benefit cost ratios and the estimated traffic volumes. And we show that a lot of the cost from our big transport projects comes because we choose to invest in the wrong ones that don't have huge benefits because they are the easiest to toll and make the most benefits for your public-private toll road partner in construction. So we'll spend the same, billions of dollars, but we'll get a lower social benefit, but a higher private benefit because it's a better road to toll, but it's only a better road to toll because it's a worse road to improve the total throughput of the network. So that's just another case where there's this hidden cost that is hard to see that we try and bring out and make explicit and explain the incentives and the dynamics at play. And there's an interesting case in Brisbane of the airport link where two former politicians got a $50 million success fee for cutting a deal to create the airport tunnel, I believe it was, that is, relatively empty and not a high priority road, but they were willing to impose that huge cost on the rest of us because they got that success fee and they used their networks to favor themselves. So that's sort of the types of insights that you get in the book.
Just going back to the effects of COVID, a lot of people are puzzled about why suddenly it's so hard to find labor, or at least they're encountering a lot of services or retail outlets that they're used to encountering are telling them that they can't find staff. And I'm wondering, do you have any particular insights onto why this has suddenly happened, apart from the fact that in, restaurants, there are no international students, or there are fewer now, therefore waiters and waitresses and those kind of jobs are harder to fill. But like in other areas of the economy, which are normally filled by locals, do you have any insights into why?
No, I don't have any great detailed insights. I have, some high level thinking that helps me make sense of things. And it's funny you ask, because a couple of other mates of mine have said to me, where have all the workers gone? I just don't get it. Can't find anyone. And yet in a lot of sectors, it's still not flowing through to wages. I think it will this year. I've just seen a few ads coming up, on my internet browsing of sign-on bonuses for different types of jobs, and a lot of people are moving jobs. But I think it's just simply a product of a couple of things. The first is the sort of the shutdown of the economy, and the fact that we all went from the normal distribution of spending to just goods and no services and no travel. And now we've swung wildly back the other way, and everyone has adjusted in one direction. Now all of a sudden we're panicking and we're adjusting in the other direction. So it's just, there's a high adjustment cost to this. So I think a lot of it is to do with that. And secondly, demand is still very high. We are having an economic boom. We did spend hundreds of billions of fiscal policy that people couldn't spend in 2020, that they started spending in 2021, and they're still spending today. So the data from, for example, the Commonwealth Bank showed a huge pool of savings in people's bank accounts at the end of last year that they're slowly spending now. So people are still spending more than they're earning in this period because they saved so much in 2020 and 2021 and got all the stimulus as well. So it's a combination of overall extra spending and this weird shift to goods and not services and not travel, and then a shift back. And I think it's just very disruptive to the labor market. Now, yeah, are the international students a factor? Yeah, in Sydney and Melbourne, in 2017 and 2018, international students were about 1 in 5 people aged under 30 in these cities. It's don't quote me on that exact number, but there's an interesting report that I read that quantified this, and it was just this enormous share of the younger workforce in the capital cities.
Totally. But to me, that's the obvious one. Like, that's clear, right? There's fewer of them.
They're also not here spending their money as well. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, they used to work in these things, but they also used to go to all the cafes, and they used to also spend their money in the economy and go to the bars and do stuff as well as work there. So yeah, it can partly be that.
And but like, where's the baggage handlers? Where are they?
Well, they're definitely not. Well, what were they meant to do the last 2 years? I guess.
I know, but what are they doing?
My point. I don't know. They're probably working in construction. That's what I would be doing.
Yeah, that's actually right. That's the only industry that's like absolutely going insane. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would be doing. If I was a young, fit guy, I would just be unloading trucks for a construction company at a work site and making good money. I used to do that when I was 19, laboring on construction sites. That's what I would do now, and instead of loading bags at the airport, for sure. I had a friend, actually. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. After the financial crisis, in the sort of post financial crisis slump we had, he used to sell IT products, and then because of the stimulus, there was a whole lot of construction work, and so he quit that to go and pour concrete instead. So people are mobile if you let them be, and they will go where the money is. But yeah, I think it's a combination of things, and I don't think I've got the exact right answer, but I think those are a few ideas that can maybe help understand what's happening.
Very good. We've solved most of the world's problems in this discussion. I like it. We'll be back next week. Thanks very much for joining me again this week.
Great to chat. Good to have you back, Jonathan.